Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima and I'm here talking about AI the Somnium Files. Just before we get started, I have to thank PlayAsia because if it wasn't thanks to them, I wouldn't have been able to afford this. So, you know, if you want to buy AI the Somnium Files or any game at all really, use the link in the description and the coupon code and you will be saving a few dollars off your order and you'll be helping me out in the process. I really do appreciate it. So, I apologize this took as long as it did, but I've been running into a fair few problems as of late that have been keeping me from doing stuff along the lines of playing lots of visual novels, so getting through this was kind of a pain in the ass, especially since I'm kind of having trouble talking right now because my gum has gone and gotten itself infected, which means it's kind of hard to talk without being in pain because ouch. So hopefully the music in the background will be able to cover for when I need to stop and recover my breath for the couple of times I might need to do it through this video. So, AI the Somnium Files, for those of you who don't know, is the latest effort of Kotaro Uchikoshi, and it's also his last effort with Spike Chunsoft. I believe partway through the development of this game, he broke off to form Tokyo Games with the creator of Danganronpa, whose name I don't remember at this point. So, it's a little bit weird seeing him break off from them after having spent literally years with them. Like, Spike Chunsoft wasn't even a thing when he was originally with them. Like, originally 999 was originally published by Spike. Not Spike Chunsoft, just Spike. They hadn't even merged yet, as far as I'm aware. So, that's a thing. Anyway, AI the Somnium Files. It is a visual novel, as is Kotaro's usual fare. It is about a detective who has the ability to dive into people's minds in order to learn information about them in terms of things like doing crimes. And this comes to a head when he finds that the ex-wife of one of his best friends has been murdered and his sorta but not kinda really adopted daughter ends up holding the bloody murder weapon, and it ends up getting him into a fair amount of strife, we'll put it that way. It's not a Kotaro Uchikoshi game if people don't suffer in some form or another, and there is a lot of suffering in the hands of a lot of people in this game. So basically the concept is, again, you're a detective and you have to go through the game doing the whole detective thing that you do, hunting down people, talking to them, and when things get to a bit of a dead end, or mostly they just clam up, you hop into the Somnium, which is basically their dreams, and you have to work through their dream in order to find that little piece of evidence in order to keep going along the storyline. And for those of you who know Kotaro Uchikoshi, you know he has this thing for branching narratives, and that's where the narratives branch, the Somniums. The facts you find out through the Somniums are where the story branches, and that's actually a really cool idea and concept. So, again, the story is pretty much linear until you get to the Somniums and then they split. And the way they start doing this with the Somniums is actually a really neat thing, because you can go through them in multiple ways, and generally they split early, although there's a couple of really annoying ones where they split late. Although not really. It's kind of strange to explain without going into spoiler territory, and I don't want to do that, at least not yet, because again, it's a Kotaro Uchikoshi game. Most of the fun from them comes in the mystery and unraveling it. But yeah, anyway, the Somnium starts off as a really cool idea, because you're wandering on through, you're interacting with objects, and if you interact with the right objects, it lets you move on to the next set of objects, and if you do that enough times, it lets you through. And it starts out being really cool like that, because you start going in and you go down one route, and then you think to yourself, oh, I wonder how when I go down the other route things change. And then you go down the other route and it's literally just the fact that you discovered something else slightly different from what you discovered in the other one was enough to change how things go down. It's a really interesting idea, and it keeps you engaged for those first few hours while things get a bit weird, because the game starts off a bit unusual, and I just want to bring this up because this is one of my main critiques of it. Now, there was a promotional campaign that was going on before the game launched, and unfortunately it was kind of kicked to the curb a little bit too early, because the game was supposed to come out 3 months earlier than it originally did, but for whatever reason they had to delay it, so this whole marketing thing they had going on with this VTuber, which is a thing if you're unaware, where it's literally just girls voicing YouTube like 3D models and doing videos with them. Very popular. I have actually seen some Kizuna Eye videos myself, but I did not go to the effort of actually watching the videos in question, mainly because I was worried it was going to be one of those things where they revealed half the game through the bloody trailers. And that's kind of sort of the thing they did with Zero Time Dilemma, because they talked about a bunch of the characters, and some of the characters were incredibly easy to guess what their twists were towards like their individual endings, because they showed them off in the trailers just that little bit too much. I was worried the same thing was going to happen in AI, so I avoided that entire like marketing scheme they had going on, where they had a bunch of VTuber videos that had one of the main characters of the game talking over some gameplay or something. I really don't know what the deal was. As I said, I avoided it completely. And this kind of ended up, well, not backfiring on me, but the thing is, it feels like you're going into a TV show where you've missed the first few episodes, because when you first start up the game, you discover a murder, again, of your best friend's ex-wife, and the girl that you have basically adopted and are living with is found holding the murder weapon, and you're thinking to yourself, what the fuck? How did this happen so quickly? Who is this girl? And then it turns out this girl is literally your roommate, and it's like, okay, I feel like I've missed something really important here, and it doesn't help when they're talking about, like, the things initially, like they're telling you about what syncing is and giving you the sort of general Kotaro Uchikoshi style explanations of the scientific concepts that are going into the game's story, and you think to yourself, did I miss something? Like, it turns out that the main character has literally been working this job for 6 years but has no memory before that point, and it's like, yeah, I feel like I've missed something completely here. To be fair, you haven't, and I can't say any more than that because, again, it goes into spoilers. It's like one of the main things the story is structured around, but yeah, I'd be lying if I said you don't feel like a fish out of water when you first get dropped in, just because everything seems to be going so quickly. To be fair, you do get settled into it pretty quickly, but at the same time, it just feels a bit odd that you get dropped in without so much as fanfare if you avoided that marketing like I did. I'm assuming that marketing is what gives you the initial push into the game, but at the same time, again, I avoided it for what I think was pretty good reasons. With that said, let's talk about the quality of the writing. Now, it is a Kotaro Uchikoshi game, it is also a Spike Chunsoft game, and it definitely blends the two together in the same way that you would expect. There are tons and tons and tons of terrible puns, running gags, and otherwise just, you know, the general sort of Kotaro Uchiko scientific insanity going on in here. And I appreciate it. I really like it. They actually did a really good job with it. Especially some of the running gags. Like, it feels like, just in general, as an overall encompassing thing, the writing quality has taken a couple of steps up from, say, Zero Escape or even Danganronpa, now that I think about it. Like, they have done a really good job in making it a lot funnier, while also making it a little bit less, like, cliche and cringeworthy. There are a couple of exceptions to this, but for the most part, I generally enjoyed the writing. There's a lot of, like, weird little things going on, because it always gets annoying to a point, because here's the drill. So, every time you go into a new room, there's a bunch of interactable objects, right? And so when you're looking at a bunch of these interactable objects and you press the button on them to examine them, it's like, at the beginning of the game anyway, a 50-50 shot whether or not you're going to get a stupid pun, a running gag, or otherwise just a weird observation about what's going on in the room. Which means that every time you enter a room, instead of looking at the person you need to look at, you need to start looking around the room like crazy, interacting with literally every object if you want to hear every funny line in the game. And it starts to become a bit of a drag later on, especially when it starts tilting towards being just literally a simple description of whatever object it is. Generally, they have the idea of the more serious the scene is, the less likely they are to crack puns and jokes at the most random of objects. But still, it's kind of annoying having to look around and think, oh, I need to look at all the objects in the room first to make sure I don't miss any of the interesting dialogue before I go and talk to this person. I mean, the game does warn you that you have basically done everything you need to and you can leave now, and it doesn't force you to leave, so you can do that after you talk to the characters, but either way, it turns into a bit of a cluster when you're looking around for random objects, especially every time you enter the boss's office, because the boss has like 50 interactable objects in her office, and almost every time you visit the damn place, there's a different character who's ready to make different puns and different silly observations, and it just gets mind-blowingly annoying at times. It's a shame because, as I said before, the writing has taken 1 or 2 quality steps up, and it's generally just more enjoyable in general to look for the silly puns and stuff like that. Like, if you've played 999, you know what I'm talking about. Like I don't know how to pronounce this, so I apologize. It's the Furinyanpa. Imagine that stupid gag, like, over like 6 different places in this game, and you've got the general idea. My personal favorite running gag was how he cannot for the life of him remember this guy's name, and man, it pays off at the end so well. I love it, like his rant at the end. It's also kind of funny because, well, considering that I played Muv-Luv recently, every time I heard the inspector's name, I thought to myself, oh well, I didn't so much think to myself as much as giggled to myself. I'd like to put a little video clip in, but I'm afraid I'd get copyright striked for it, because frankly, I've been copyright striked for fucking everything on this channel in the past 2 weeks, and it's starting to piss me off. Anyway, sorry, back to the Somnium Files. But yeah, writing quality, a couple of steps up. Voice acting quality. Now, this actually surprised me. I started out with the game on English, and I swapped to the Japanese to get the idea of the Japanese, and the Japanese is about as what you'd expect. Then I swapped back to the English, and I kept it there for the rest of the game, and I was legitimately surprised at the fact that I managed to do that, mainly because the English voice acting is way better than most other games I've played recently. Like, legitimately surprised at this, because Date and his AI companion that lives inside his eyeball, yes, that's a thing, are both really well voiced, and thanks to the fact that, as I said, the writing quality is a couple of steps up from where it previously was, the relationship between them and the back and forth banter is great. Date ends up being the sort of, like, you know, perverted old man that Kotaro loves having as his like general main character. But he's got this AI character lady with him who calls him out on his shit repeatedly. So it has this great sort of back and forth going between them when they're constantly snarking at each other. And it works great. Like, I gotta admit, like, I admit that it'll probably get boring after a while, but him partnering up the main character is probably the best thing that Kotaro could have done with this character, because having someone be there constantly to just call him on his shit is like the best thing for a Kotaro Uchikoshi main character. And a bunch of other characters are great as well. Like, most of the other main cast that, like, aren't particularly noteworthy are still pretty good at their roles. Even when it gets a little bit cringy, at least it feels cringy on purpose. Like, again, there's this other running gag going on where Ota, one of the, well, he's basically a kid, but he's like 24. It's a little strange, I gotta admit. But there is this one kid named Ota who gets constantly fed by, like, a maid cafe lady, and it's like, this is cringy, but it's cringy in just the right way. There's this receptionist minor character off to the side who literally has the voice of, like, a Western drawl American girl who you just want to punch in the face, and that's exactly her personality. Especially with the whole lol's so random thing that typical stereotype has going on. She has that too, and it actually works for her character. And all credit to Mizuki, who's probably the best character in the entire game, who somehow has the voice of, like, an elementary school kid without being annoying as shit. You have no idea how hard that is to pull off in any sort of, like, serious story-driven game, an English-voiced child is really hard to pull off successfully, and they did spectacularly here, to the point where Mizuki is probably my favorite character in the entire game just because of how much ass she kicks. It's really weird just to have so many well-acted English characters in this game, especially when you start getting to a couple of the later game revelations, and there's this one character who's like consistently insane, and he's just insane enough. This main character, who I'm not going to talk about because, again, spoilers, but this main character who just slowly starts descending into insanity is really well done just because of how subtle it is. They did a really good job with the voice casting in this title, and I really do appreciate that because, well, it makes it a lot easier to listen to. What would I talk about next? Right, there is one character who I'm kind of annoyed by, though, and again, it kind of ties back into the whole thing where... It kind of ties back into the whole thing where there was this whole advertising push going on, where the VTuber was actually one of the main characters of the game. And that's the one character I disliked the most, because, my god, she's a bitch. Aset, the internet idol, pink hair, cat ear headband, and crap like that. Like, honestly, I couldn't stand her. And, again, without getting too deeply into spoilers, a bunch of it is justified in a lot of ways that you might not expect, but at the same time, I gotta admit, like, does it make up for wading through a few hours of shit to deal with this? Like, it's this weird combination of a bunch of things going on. Like, there's a couple of, like, really annoying things that just intersect that make her character a bit of a pain in the neck. And even when you take one or two of them away, there's still a couple of things that are sitting there. Again, I can't really get into it because spoilers, because of course it's spoilers. It's all spoilers. It's always spoilers, but basically, if you're, like, here's the thing, right? Here's something I can talk about without getting too deeply into spoilers. So some of the things that she does are so dated that I can't help but think that when this game gets replayed in 10 years by people, or people who just haven't played it before in general, going through Kotaro Ushikoshi's work, because these games will fade into obscurity eventually. That's just the way that these sort of, like, niche titles tend to go. But the Minecraft references and the VTuber references are just too much. It's just way too much. There's a couple of Somniums that take place in a world that, and I quote, is called Shovel Forge. Yeah. And it looks like Minecraft. It sounds like well, it doesn't sound exactly like Minecraft, but it is kind of basically Minecraft. And I can't help but think that is going to be so dated in 10 years and people are not going to understand what the fuck is going on. Same thing with VTubers, although I imagine that streaming culture might continue a bit longer, so it might not be hard to do the transplant, but I gotta admit, when I was walking through and, like, doing the puzzles in relation to those areas, I was rolling my eyes. I was thinking to myself, oh god, let this end. It isn't helped by the fact that as a VTuber and an internet idol, she does actually have a single, as in an actual song, that she sings throughout the game, and, like, they make you listen to it, like, 3 or 4 times in a really short period, and it starts to really grind on you after a while, especially if you're playing in the English language, because the English writing for this song is awkward. It feels like it was awkwardly beat into a song from the original Japanese lyrics, and I didn't like it. I did not like it at all. And I'm the sort of person who listens to bloody K-On! From time to time, so just, like, trust me. If this was a decent song, I would probably be into it, but it's not. It just drives me mad. If only it had the option, like, bringing up K-On! Again for, like, coincidence, but in K-On! What they did was, in English, in the English dubs of it that they released on DVD, they had the English voices, which were terrible, by the way. Don't bother watching it in English. Watch the Japanese dub. But when it actually got to the songs, it went Japanese again, which I think would have been a better approach for this just because of how bad the song was in English. But, oh well, we'll just ignore that. But yeah, back to Aset as a character. There's a bunch of things she does in story that just make her kind of annoying. And then there's a few other things that happen which get actually justified at the end of the day, because the way this game works, it isn't like Zero Escape, for example. Well, it is kind of like Zero Escape, but in this game it feels a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? Where everything just feels like it fits better together. Now, you're going down the routes, right? And you're getting different pieces of information, and... excuse me. You're getting different pieces of information, and you're using those pieces of information to unlock things in other routes. There are locks in this game, a lot like how you had a lock on the true end of 999, just as an example, right? But it all feels a little bit more well put together because you're solving the same case, you're looking for the same murderer, and in the general scheme of things, you're going down most of the routes in order to do that. So when you're going down each route and finding out more information about the killer, it feels a little bit better put together than, say, 999 or VLR, for example, where bad people can seemingly come out of nowhere. There are a couple of things where bad guys can seemingly come out of nowhere, but again, it just feels a lot better put together in that sense, and in that case, it makes sense at the end of the day why ASET does some of the things she does. But at the same time, again, it's that argument. Is it worth going through this river of this annoying character in order to get to the point where she, quote unquote, well, not quote unquote, but like, you know, finger quotes, redeems herself? And it was kind of hard towards the end of the game, to be perfectly honest, especially when we start talking about the endings. Now, don't tune out yet. Don't tune out yet. We're not going to get into spoilers just yet, but I just want to say that the endings in this game are, for the most part, actually kind of unsatisfying until you start getting to the end. And there's a couple of reasons for this, because the first reason is that when you go down the actual endings, most of them are character endings, right? So you end up spending a lot more time with certain characters than you do others. And it just kind of peters off for the most part. Like, except for like 2 or 3 endings that happen towards the very end of the game that you basically have to unlock in sequence that really start winding down the main plot, all of the cases just kind of end. Like, you think to yourself, wait, that was it? They don't go on and actually solve the case, they kind of just cut it right there. And it's kind of reasonable as to why, but because, you know, obviously there wouldn't be a mystery if they found out who the killer was on those endings. And at the same time, they give you a little bit of information towards the individual character endings, towards who is the main killer, sometimes. Like, ASET's ending, for example, is just a fart in a windstorm. It just stops, right? It just ends, and you get absolutely nothing out of it, and it feels like her entire route, although it wasn't really her entire route, because it branches off at the very end. So you feel like you don't have to go back too far in order to head down the other route and find out exactly what's going on. But there are a couple of routes like that too. Like, I think Oda's route was one of them, so it's just a bit weird going down these routes and getting basically nothing out of them. If you're lucky, you'll be like me, you'll get one ending where at least one person responsible ends up dead, and you think to yourself, oh, so there will actually be a little bit of progress, so it gives you a little bit of motivation in order to go through the rest of the endings. But it just, I feel like they could have put the endings together just a little bit better to give you a little bit extra closure. Like, even a text screen at the end that said, they found the killer, but this is not where you find it, or something like that, because they do get into that when, again, we're getting into spoilers here, but yeah, they do kind of get into that. So even just that little text screen on the end would have been great, just to give you that little bit of extra motivation to push through and start looking at the other routes. So, without getting into spoilers, let's start talking about the actual puzzles in the game, and they're called Somniums, and as I said, they're a really clever idea at first. You dive in, you have multiple ways to, and by multiple I mean 2, there's never any more than 2. Sometimes they're linear puzzles, but there's never any more than 2 solutions. But you end up in a dream world where logic and just reason are generally thrown out the window, and you have to work your way through their dreams in order to try and figure out that little bit of subconscious information that they're hiding. And it is a really clever idea, and for the most part, it works really well. For the most part, all you have to do is wander around and interact with objects. And as I said before, it's got that silly Uchikoshi touch. So there are a ton of different like little items that you can interact with in multiple different ways. And most of them are actually quite funny. Like all the times that you see pots, you can put them on your head and you look ridiculous when you're doing them because it carries over to other cutscenes and stuff as well. Because of course it does. But it's kind of kicked in the bollocks by the game mechanics. Now, the way that going into the Somnium Dream World works is that you've only got 6 minutes while you're in there to actually do stuff. And it isn't actually 6 minutes, it's not real time. Basically, you do actions and they take time. And if you run out of time, you have to basically restart the thing or retry from a checkpoint, which is also a bit of a pain in the ass, but again, we'll get to that. But you interact with an object, and whenever you do an action with said object, it takes a certain amount of seconds away. So you could be looking at something, and it'll take 30 seconds off the clock, right? And it takes very little time to actually get around. All of the Somniums are very small, and you actually don't use any time while you're standing still. You only use seconds in real time when you're moving, so there's very little that you can actively do to screw yourself over unless you're actively running in circles, and there isn't a single Somnium in this game that is solved by letting the time run out. I will tell you that right away. It's object interactions. You have to do object interactions. And there are also some other mechanics going along with that. Like, you do certain interactions, for example, and you will get these things called timies, which will actually slow down, or in some cases, which is really annoying, speed up certain interactions so that they take less or more time. So you can actually save up a bunch of them and use them on more complicated actions in order to save yourself time. And there are a bunch of reasons to do this. The main reason to do this is that if you manage to make it out of a Somnium with more than 0.01 seconds left, you will actually get like concept art, and it's how you work towards some of the things. And there are also some hidden objects in there that will also get you more concept art, which I don't have a problem with. Some of them are really fucking hard to find. I didn't find like more than 3 out of like 16. But yeah, I don't have a problem with that, so we're just gonna leave that one alone. But yeah. There are timies that, as I said before, will reduce time, but there are also timies that will give you time. And there are a couple of puzzles that will exploit timies, which is what they're called, to their absolute limit. And it starts to really piss you off, because you're just going along, you're having fun doing random interactions, sometimes you're getting through by the skin of your teeth and it's okay, but there are puzzles in the game that eventually really start to push how much you like the timey system, because there are interactions that you do that have like a question mark over the timey you're going to get. They tell you at first, but after a while they start to hide them. And then you pick them, and it turns out it's one that increases your next action by 3 times the regular time that it would usually take, and you have to use it. There's like no just waiting for it to go away or whatever. You actively have to use it on an object. And if you get that early on in particular Somniums, you might as well just restart from the very beginning, because fuck you, that's why. It gets really frustrating, because if you actually want to see the silly interactions with all the funny stuff, you have to be going through at least 3 or 4 times before you get to see everything. And I just decided after the first couple of Somniums that it wasn't worth it, and I just started going through and doing as much stuff as I possibly could. But again, they play with these timey systems and make the solutions to them so precise that even if you're going through with like a perfect guide walkthrough, which I admit I did on at least one Somnium, it will drive you mad, because there is one that is literally just a maze. There is one that's literally just a maze of doors that you have to be constantly trying and going through and getting lost. And like, even if you're doing a perfect run, like I failed at that one twice, and I thought to myself, I can't do this anymore. I have to look up a guide. And even on the perfect route, you still only get a minute or 2 to spare. So it's like, why do you do this to me? Why do you make this happen? And it's kind of frustrating, as I said in the later ones, where they exploit this system as much as humanly possible, so you practically have to do a perfect run in order to get through them. And it makes sense in the, like, story-wise, where you basically have to be putting in a lot of effort in order to make sure that you actually pull it off. But man, I gotta admit, it just started getting really frustrating after a while. And if you're one of those sorts of people who don't like annoying puzzles like making pentagrams, for example. That one really ticked me off, even though I got it solved pretty quickly. I'd suggest just using guides, if I'm being perfectly honest. Just use a guide and go through that way. You'll still get the majority of the story either way. It's not like going around and randomly interacting with things is massively important to the plot of figuring out the entire dream logic. At least, don't feel bad about using a guide if you do end up deciding to drop the entire thing and just pick one up, because, yeah, I needed it towards the end, and trust me, you won't regret it either if you're the sort of person that kind of hates puzzles. Especially when you have to do them perfectly in order to get through with it, while also getting the concept art that you need to get all the achievements, of which there are a fair few. Admittedly, the achievements in this game aren't that bad. There's a few that I like where they use some of those running gags to their advantage and do things along those lines, where there are just like little conversations off to the side that you can have that you need to find. And admittedly, the game's pretty generous about it, because you can jump to pretty much any conversation at any time and it works pretty well. So if you need to go back like achievement hunting, it's pretty easy to go and do that if you like. What else is there to talk about? There's plenty of cultural references if you care about that sort of thing. There's actually lots of them. Like, there's plenty of references to previous, like, games that Kotaro's done, especially bloody 999. They rip half the sounds from 999 to use in this game's UI. There's a full-on advertisement for 999 in one of the transition screens. And there's a few references to other, like, Spike Chunsoft games as well. There's the obligatory Danganronpa reference or two. And there's a couple of references to really obscure things. Like, I know JoJo isn't obscure, but in comparison to half the stuff they reference in this game, it is pretty obscure. But then they go and reference the bloody Gaki no Tsukai Batsu games, and that's a bloody obscure reference right there. I'm surprised they didn't go to the effort to replace that one like they did the Super Sentai with Cool Burger reference in Virtue's Last Reward. I'm surprised they didn't go to that effort, but well, they did, and they left it in there, and that's kind of neat. Then again, they did leave a My Little Sister Can't Possibly Be This Cute reference in Danganronpa 2, so I can't for the life of me imagine why they wouldn't, but anyway. The presentation is pretty good. It's mainly just a combination of like small rooms, sometimes with fancy effects once you enter the dream world, and the models and stuff are okay. There's nothing wrong with the way it looks. And the soundtrack is enjoyable, but it just kind of fades into the background, so I don't mind it too much. You're paying more attention to what's going on in the story anyway. What else is there to talk about? I already talked about how half the sounds have been ripped directly from 999, so it kind of feels like a nostalgia trip in that sense. What else is there? The game's not particularly grand on PC. I mean, like, to be fair, it runs pretty well, and it's got a few options, although not many. It's kind of annoying that you have to choose between whether or not to excuse me again. It's kind of weird that you have to choose exclusively between using a keyboard and mouse, a DualShock 4, or an Xbox 360 pad in the launcher before the game. I'm not entirely sure why you have to do that. There's not much in the way of graphical options, and I was playing this on a low-end PC. I was playing this mainly on a GPD Win 2, but I did pop it onto my main computer to see what it looked and sounded like there. And like, the difference between low and fantastic graphics isn't actually there. It's weird. Like, it doesn't really make that much of a difference to me. But yeah, they give you a basic set of graphical options, and generally it'll work fine. But if you're playing this on integrated graphics, I'm just going to warn you now, the game will generally not crash. It'll run fine on something like a GPD Win 2 level of hardware, but the end credits is the worst part of the game for the game's performance, and I could not get through the credits on my GPD Win 2. I had to come back to my, I had to go to YouTube actually and look up if there was anything more after the end credits. And there is. It's a dance thing where you can just put any of the characters in and have them do the dance that the Internet Idol is famous for at the very end. A weird choice for an extra mode, but I'm not going to question it. It's not very important anyway. You don't need to worry about it. But yeah, if you're playing through the game and it crashes on the end credits, don't feel bad. You didn't really miss anything. What else is there? And by the end credits, I mean the end credits. Like, they literally do a musical number. So, I know, it's a bit weird to say it out loud, but yeah, they literally do a musical number. So, yeah, if you're thinking like, is there anything after the musical number? There's not, don't worry, if your game crashes there, you can just put it down, it's fine. What else is there? The action scenes were a little bit weird. There are a bunch of, like, quick time events they've got going on that are really, really easy. Like, they're not even close to something like Resident Evil 4. I got them all on my first try. And it's really weird because they actually give you achievements for getting them on your first try without getting any misses. And it is incredibly easy to do that. Like, it is legitimately one of the easiest things imaginable to do that. The quick time events are not hard at all. So you literally just have to press like a combination of buttons most of the time, or very, very slowly move your analog stick over a thing. It's weird, and the actual action scenes are kind of weird as well. Like, now, I know it's kind of immersion breaking when you've got a bunch of trained mercenaries who are all holding like MP5s that end up being distracted by porno mags, and somehow, despite the fact that they're all firing like 20-something bullets a second or something, like it's very clear that there's like 7 dudes all firing at one person and they still somehow can't hit them, despite the fact that this person is closing in for melee combat. It's weird. It's really strange. It kind of takes you out of it, if I'm being perfectly honest, but it's still a bit odd that just that happens. There are a couple of things that like bring up a sort of like Rain Man level of like autistic math and calculations that kind of work sometimes and kind of don't. When it works, it's satisfying. When it doesn't, it doesn't. It isn't. And it happens enough times to not be satisfying, to be kind of annoying. I wish they put a little bit more effort into thinking out the action scenes and like more clever ways. Like, there's this one point where they literally have a bulletproof ATV, but they drive it like a regular car. Why not just drive it up and just slam into a bunch of them? Anyway, I don't really, yeah. It's not the most important thing, it's just weird when it happens. Like, the rest of the game is doing a good job of keeping you relatively grounded in its world, and then shit like that happens. So it's a little bit strange along those lines. What else is there to talk about without getting into spoilers? Because I'd like to avoid getting into spoilers for as long as humanly possible, despite the fact we've been at this for 37 minutes already. Good lord, I've already looped the like soundtrack they include alongside the game. What else is there? What else is there? I'm gonna have to go check the bloody achievement list, aren't I? Thankfully I've got it right here because I've got Steam open. So yeah, there's all the Somniums. I talked about how there's a bunch of other things going on. Like there's a bunch of weird like little side gags that they give you achievements for. And yeah, I'm pretty sure I've talked about everything. They give you a bunch of files that you get to fill out with like little definitions and stuff, and the definitions are funny as well. They give you little character files on everything, although since they don't really update along with the story to help you keep everything in track, they're kind of useless. There is, as I said before, a little bit of concept art you can unlock, which in most cases is pretty cute. I already talked about the voice acting and the writing and all that, so I guess all that's left to go into is what I've thought of it. And I mean, overall, I'd say I enjoyed it. Like, I liked it. I put 25 hours into it, and that is getting to be a bit quick about it. Like, I was starting to skip dialogues and stuff towards the end. I wasn't going, like, smooth and, like, slow and steady wins the race. I was not doing that. I was going through pretty quick towards the end. So, if you're going through at a roughly relaxed pace, I'd say 30 hours would get you through. Probably a little bit less than that, but then again, you know, if you're trying to fiddle around with all the Somniums and stuff like that, you could easily chuck a few extra hours onto the end. Would I say it's worth it? I would. I wouldn't call it his best work. I'd call it his most polished and... I would call it his most polished work, and there are absolutely things going on like the typical Kotaro Uchikoshi twists and ridiculous scientific things going on, and there's a couple that they say for the very end of the game, which I appreciate because it means that the game remains interesting towards the very end. But I just, yeah, I would say that it's worth it. It is still enjoyable despite all the faults and general things that I brought up there in this like 40-minute rant we got going on. And I enjoyed it. I don't think it's his best work, but at the same time, I do believe, as I said, it's his most polished work, it's his most well-rounded work, and at the same time, that is worth some enjoyment in and of itself. And, well, yeah, I appreciate that. So, I don't really want to get into spoilers, so I think we'll just end it off here. Again, thanks to PlayAsia for helping me afford this. If you want to buy it, use the link in the description to do that, because, you know, it will help me out. It really does help me out. There are a bunch of games I wouldn't have been able to afford otherwise, so yeah, please, if you want to help me out, do that. Otherwise, this has been Blue Maxima, and I will see you all next time.